Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. We are going to give it 1 minute or so to let everybody get in the room, and then we will get started. Be right back with everybody. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining your hour with APA Virginia. I know we'll have some individuals logging on over the next few minutes, but in the essence of time, we want to go ahead and get started. My name is Martina James. I am staff with APA Virginia, and I appreciate you logging on to join us today. First and foremost, we want to thank the Berkeley Group for sponsoring your hour with APA Virginia. We wouldn't be able to bring this to you all free of charge without their sponsorship and support, so thank you to that team. Our monthly webinar series happens the fourth Monday of each month at noon. As you can see from your screen, you're looking at APA Virginia's YouTube page, where all of our webinars, including this one, are recorded as the presentation is made live. And then as soon as the presentation concludes, it's uploaded to our YouTube page. All of the webinars are available for CM credits live and recorded. For the recording, if you click in the notes on the YouTube page, it'll give you that CM credit identification number for the recording to be submitted. If you have any questions about webinars or are interested in presenting or a topic that you'd like to see done, please reach out to us. We're always looking for new ideas. Our webinars are booked through the end of December, and post-webinar today, including the link to the recorded and posted webinar, you will get a list of our upcoming webinars through December. So if there's anything starting in 2020 that you'd like to see included, please let us know. October 28th webinar is going to be presented by Emily Crow, addressing building a resilient community through your comprehensive plan. The following webinar dates are Monday, November 28th, and please adjust your December webinar calendar for December 16th. We are moving that up 1 week due to the Christmas holidays. We look forward to you joining each of those, and as always, they're always available for CM credits as we go. Real quick, before we get into today's webinar, I just wanted to touch on a couple other events that the chapter is sponsoring and has coming up that are also, some are also available for webinar, or CM credits. If you do not get our e-blast sent out through MailChimp already, where all these are listed, please contact me at martina@apavirginia.com. That's Martina, MARTINA, at apavirginia.com, and I'll get you added to our list. You can also visit our website at apavirginia.com for all of these events. This evening, we've also been asked to share, there's a Complete Streets open house event being hosted at Tuckahoe Library from 4 to 7 p.m. by Plan RVA. Hear about how our region can work together to make streets function effectively for everyone, regardless of age, ability, or mode of travel. And on our website, you can register for that as well. That's free. We have one of our fall symposium is coming up October 20th and 21st. in Alexandria, Virginia. It'll be hosted at the Embassy Suites in Old Town, and there is a block of rooms available at a discounted rate that's actually at a cost lower than per diem rate. To book those, you can book through apavirginia.com or call the Embassy Suites, but those must be booked by this coming Friday. The symposium is a registration cost of $90. You can find more information about the symposium at apavirginia.com as well. This is our website. You can register online. If you have any questions, again, you can contact me at martina@apavirginia.com. And additionally, on our website, we have listed all other upcoming webinars and learning opportunities that are open for CM credits. Just some general housekeeping before I hand off the webinar presentation to Adrian. I ask that you hold all questions. For those of you who've done this before, you've heard this before, but hold all of your questions and to our chat box. To our questions box. As the presentation goes on, you can type your questions into the question box in your control panel. At the end of the presentation, about 10 minutes before 1, we will end Adrian's presentation, and I will take the questions and she will answer those live. And if we need to do any follow-up on individual questions, we are happy to do that. So to get started, today's presentation will explore the evolution of innovative mobility, how it is changing the landscape of transportation in our cities, how cities can plan for mobility and microtransit programs, and funding opportunities for these programs. Adrian Harrington is our presenter, and she was born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina. She earned a degree in Geography and Community Regional Planning for Appalachian State, then obtained a teaching certificate at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. After teaching 8th grade for 3 years, she decided to make a career change and go back to school. She then earned a Master's of Public Administration at UNC Wilmington in 2011, including an internship to implement North Carolina's first bicycle boulevard. This project was the beginning of her passion for creating sustainable, healthy, and active communities by implementing alternative transportation projects. She was a transportation planner for the Wilmington Metropolitan Planning Organization for 8 years with a focus on planning and securing funding for bicycle and pedestrian projects. She started the Wilmington Region's Go Coast program, which promotes alternative transportation solutions to businesses, commuters, and community members. She was also UNC Wilmington's transportation manager before joining Gotcha, a microtransit service company, as their director of university and government affairs. In 2018, Adrian decided she wanted to start her own business and called it Smart Moves Consulting. Smart Moves has participated in a variety of projects, including the establishment of large-scale integrated mobility program, the coordination of a public-private project, including the establishment of large-scale integrated mobility programs. I just read that line doubly. I apologize, Adrian. It's definitely a Monday. Adrian's grant writing efforts have been rewarding lately. Through successful partnerships with other agencies, her project teams have secured almost $85 million for transportation-related projects. I hope I didn't butcher that too much, Adrian. I'm going to hand it over to you. Again, please, as the presentation goes on, include your questions in the question box below, and we'll address those at the end. I am going to hand control over to you, Adrian.
All right. Thank you, Martina. And can everybody see my presentation now? Does that look right?
It looks good. You just need to put it into the formal presentation mode. There you go.
There we go. Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much, Martina, for that introduction. And thank you to everyone else for joining us for this webinar today. This is a high-level overview of my experiences and what I have learned in the last few years planning and implementing mobility programs. So today we will touch on the evolution of transportation, we'll talk about some disruptive transportation, and then we'll get into some federal government goals for shared and new mobility and microtransit, and then we'll talk about some funding opportunities for those same programs. As far as the evolution of ground transportation, transportation has definitely evolved from the most simple form, which would be walking, to the wheel and cart, which made horse and carriage an effective and efficient way to move people and goods back in the day. But it was definitely the invention of the combustion engine that really changed our transportation options. And for years now, we've had cars and trains and buses and light and heavy rail, and even some of these are electric services. But what is the next big thing? I believe the next big thing is impacted by technology and the willingness of people to share, not so much own things anymore, and also the evolution of new partnerships. So if you look at new mobility as new ways to fight traffic congestion, the ongoing battle, it was kind of separated into different services based on the distance that you're traveling. So micromobility would be considered transit solutions for like less than 5 or 6 miles. So you're looking at, bikes and scooters and, micro transit services. And, this less than 6 miles is actually like 60% of the trips in the United States. And then your medium distance would be like your 6 to 15 miles. And that's when, we're using Uber and Lyft to get around. And that, consists of about 25% of the trips in the United States. And then your long distance traveling would be anything more than 15 miles. And that's definitely when we get into, this is why I want to own my personal vehicle, because I've got to travel this long distance, or even, if you rent a car for a day or a week or whatever that may be. And that consists about 15% of the trips in the United States. So the microtransit side and this micromobility, we're going to spend some time kind of in this space today. But we'll also talk about how to integrate this into your medium distance and your long distance travel modes. So bike and scooter share. This one's definitely been interesting over the last few years, but the bike share is definitely not new in our country anymore. It's been around for at least 10 years, if not longer. And it did start with the dock-based system. So this is when technology allowed us to create these stations that could accept payments, and you could grab a bike from any one of these heavy infrastructure kiosks, and you can set up your memberships, whether they are monthly or weekly or annually or just by trip, and everything is dock-based. And then came along the idea of taking that technology and actually putting it on the back of the bicycle. And one of the benefits of this is when you have the technology on the back of the bicycle or the scooter, there's a lot of data that comes out of this. So with the dock-based system, you can see where people are checking out and they're returning the bikes or the scooters. But with the technology on the back of the bike, you can actually see where people are traveling, and you can use that in your transportation planning efforts and otherwise. So it was really the data that was coming out of the technology on the back of the bike that was really appealing. And then there's also like a hybrid version. So this is what I would call your dockless yet rack friendly. So this is an effort to go, okay, we don't want to use the heavy infrastructure kiosk, but the bikes and the scooters need to go to a place at the end of a trip to try to keep this more organized and predictable. So in some of the pictures you see, like there's a rack there that looks like it holds a bike and a scooter. And then there's another option where, you still have the signage panel, you have the metal bike racks, and this is where the bikes are supposed to be locked. But at the end of a trip, this is where you bring them. There's nothing that will take your credit card at these stations. They're not really stations, but it is a place to lock your bike or your scooter afterwards. And then I do have 2 pictures on here that they don't really fall in any of these categories. So the Long Beach e-scooter share drop zone in the 3rd row, and the picture on the bottom right-hand corner, those are examples of where you can just take the existing sidewalk and you literally draw on them where you want these assets to be at the beginning or the end of a trip. And these spaces are usually geofenced, so the technology will allow the user and the company to know if you did actually leave these assets where you were supposed to leave them. So microtransit, the low-speed electric vehicles, these are definitely interesting. So depending on the vehicle, it can fit about 6 people in each vehicle, and they're usually not allowed on roads with 35 miles per hour or more. A lot of times they are most successful in environments that that have their own culture, their own identity, a little close-knit environment in higher density areas. And they also need some participation and promotion from the private sector to make sure that they are helping to get people in these vehicles and know about this transportation option. But some of these examples would be your college campuses, even your senior living neighborhoods. If there's a higher density senior living neighborhoods, these residents may not want to drive, may not be able to drive, but they're in close proximity of the assets they need access to. So your grocery stores, the pharmacy, the barber shop, whatever it may be. And this could be a solution for that scenario as well. Major employer headquarters, anytime where there's an employer campus, a very large employer campus, and there's multiple buildings and, there's different amenities on site, having an opportunity for the employees to be able to get from building to building and around their employer campus is helpful. Plus any vibrant nightlife. So if you think about like the Vegas Strip or South Beach, Miami, something like that where, again, it's high density, it's a bit of a close-knit area, but it's very vibrant. You can use microtransit for people to be able to get around as they are enjoying their nightlife. Plus, tourism destinations and hospitality services is another opportunity. So if you think, for example, in Washington, D.C., there's lots of museums and lots of places to check out. You could create partnerships between hotels and those museums in a way to be able to advertise to people, hey, you can come to DC, you can check out these you could check out these museums, you could stay at this hotel, and if you stay at this hotel, you can actually leave your vehicle at home, come into the city, take the train into the city, and use this microtransit service to be able to get around and explore what you would like. And they're also, microtransit's also helpful for event transportation. So there's usually a lot of traffic around major events, and a way that you could combat that traffic is to provide these microtransit services. So you may have pick up and drop off location points, that people could use, and then that way they can get a ride straight to the front door of that event and not have to worry about parking their car and driving their car and everything else. Microtransit is also very helpful anytime that you're wanting to keep parking on the perimeter in an effort to maintain like an epicenter of livability. So if you have an area where you're wanting to reduce the traffic congestion and you want people to be able to walk around and window shop and explore an area, but keep the parking on the outside, this would be a good option to be able to connect people to like the parking deck to that epicenter of livability. And then there's also a lot of times where there's a need for a temporary solution to a transitional period or construction where this could help out as well. So for example, if you have an office building that's being renovated and the staff are temporarily relocated elsewhere, let's say, a whole department has to go, 2 miles down the road while a building is being renovated, but those staff have to be able to get back to the main building to be able to go to meetings. This could be an opportunity to provide that connection. And if a company has a satellite location, maybe they wanted to go with a satellite location because the real estate was a little bit cheaper. But now you have a satellite location and those employees need to get back to the main office building. This would be another example of how microtransit could help make those connections. So planning for these microtransit services, there's a lot of detail that goes into this, and there's a lot of things to think about, and we can't get into all those details in this 1 hour, but here's some ideas that I did want to point out. The service model, you've got several different options here. You can do a point-to-point service. So this would be where you could pick out maybe 10 to 15 places where you could be picked up or dropped off with one of these microtransit services. So it's a set number of locations, and that's it. So the fixed route option would run very much like your traditional bus service. It follows the same route. There's a schedule. You know exactly when the vehicle is going to show up at the stop that you're at. And then the other one is on demand. So this is where the user would have a mobile app, and they could go onto their app and they could request a ride. And usually this is in like a geo-fenced area. So they could be anywhere within that area and they can request a ride anywhere within that area. It's not the 10 or 15 points or anything like that. You just have to stay in that geo-fenced area. But then there's also hybrid versions of all three of these. So one example would be you could have a service model where a user can request a ride by using that same mobile app to and from any one of the set number of predetermined areas. So it's using that app to say, hey, I'm going to need a ride in 5 minutes. And instead of going to that one location and waiting for the vehicle to come by. So that would be an example of a hybrid model. And then the operations model. So depending on, you could have a city that could own and operate microtransit, a transit agency can do it, even a private company like an employer could do this as well. But there's a couple different operations models that you would want to keep in mind. The one that would be most burdensome for the city or the transit agency would be if they own and operate the entire program. So you're talking about buying all the vehicles, finding drivers, setting the schedule. You got to figure out the technology behind it, but they would own and operate absolutely everything. The next option would be where the city or the transit agency would own the vehicles, but they would contract out the operations. So even though they would own the vehicles, they would find another company that would provide the drivers. That other company may provide the technology. So it's a little bit of a split deal. And then the other option would be the easiest option for a city or transit agency, and this would be a completely turnkey leasing model. So this is where you find another company, they bring in the vehicles, they have the technology, they have the drivers, they have the liability policy, they have absolutely everything, and they just launch it in your city. So that would be the easiest for the city or the transit agency, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's also probably the most expensive one as well. But you don't have to use your staff time trying to implement and operate a microtransit service this way. So then there's a couple of other components to kind of keep in mind with implementing microtransit service. One of them, which is kind of one of my favorites, is branding. And I'm going to use an example out of Anaheim, California. They have a microtransit service called FRAN. And FRAN is actually an acronym. It stands for Free Rides Around the Neighborhood. But Fran is also a lady who is a bit of an icon or historical icon in this area. So Fran is actually Francisca Avila Rimpau, and her father was the mayor of Pueblo, Los Angeles before California even became a part of the United States. In 1850, she married a German immigrant, and their marriage is one of the first recognized after California gained statehood. She had 15 children, which is crazy, who became the earliest real estate developers, educators, movers, and shakers of Los Angeles and Anaheim. And in their microtransit fleet, there are 10 vehicles, and each one of the 10 vehicles are named after her daughters and her granddaughters. So this is a really neat way to brand those vehicles to provide or to preserve like the character and the heritage and the history of Anaheim. But at the same time, it's really cool how they managed to turn this into an acronym, Free Rides Around the Neighborhood, that says a lot about the service. So that's a cool example of branding. The equity component is also very important. Anytime you're doing any type of microtransit service as well, a little piece of information behind the equity component, even allowing people to hail a ride in the old school traditional throw your hand up in the air like you're trying to catch a cab. Even that is providing an equity component to your program, because that is basically saying, hey, you don't have to have a smartphone, you don't have to have this app downloaded, but you can still use this service to get from point A to point B. The only thing with that is that data is a very important component of all of these services, and you need to be able to collect the data based on who's riding. So if you are going to allow people to ride the microtransit service, you need to have a way for the driver to document these rides, and not only how many rides, but where they're going and the time of day, because you need this data to be able to make adjustments to your program to make it even more successful. But there's ways to work with that. And then being ADA compliant is a huge deal, but as you know, we talked about with these vehicles, they can seat, maybe 6 people. So taking a vehicle and providing space for a wheelchair, for example, could take up, as much as 2 to 4 seats in the vehicle, which kind of defeats the purpose. But one way to accommodate that is, let's say, for example, the FRAN program in Anaheim, they have 10 vehicles. They have a vehicle that is dedicated just to being ADA compliant. So it has the space in it to be able to put a wheelchair in there. And that vehicle is available at all times during the service times. So if somebody needs the ADA vehicle, they can request that specific one, and it will be able to meet those ADA requirements. And then, of course, funding. One thing to think about is if you are going to do the branding, where you get to, custom design these really cool vehicles that, really match the character of your neighborhood, that while all that looks great and it's really cool, it does take away the opportunity for advertisements. And advertisements can help you generate money to help pay for the program. So while there are vehicles that are wrapped in advertisements, there are also other opportunities to bring in funding for these programs. So you can actually put advertisements inside of the vehicle. You can put them on the headrest of the seats in the car. You can also put them, you can put advertisements in the mobile app. If you have those, 10 to 15 point-to-point locations, if there's a sign at each location, there's opportunities for advertisements there. And bringing in that money can help offset the cost of the program altogether. So disruptive transportation. I find this stuff so interesting. For the sake of a definition, we'll call disruptive transportation when technology and business models combine to create new products that create new markets that change and impact the current industry. And the example that I wanted to show you guys is using birds, so the bird scooters. So they're possibly the most disruptive and possibly the most successful example of disruptive transportation becoming big business. In 14 months, they had scooters in 120 cities, and a landmark that they hit before any other company in history was they hit the $2 billion valuation mark in less than 1 year. And just to give you guys some perspective on that Airbnb, it took them 3 years to hit that same mark, and it took Uber 4 years to hit that same mark, respectively. They've secured $415 million in funding, and I actually think that number was from about this time last year, so I'm sure it's more than that. And same thing with the number of rides. This time last year, they had already had 10 million rides on bird scooters. So clearly people are interested, they like it, there's no shortage of capital behind this program, but as a part of their business model and how they launched this, it did result in some fines and some court fees, and scooters were being seized, and there were cease and desist letters and lawsuits. However, at the same time, they're also getting a lot of awards. So Time Magazine has a Genius Company of the Year, and in 2018, Bird received that award. And then Inc. also had the Company of the Year in 2018, and Bird received that award too. Something else that Bird does have is on staff, they have a whole swath of policy analysts, lobbyists, attorneys, and key government officials to help elevate these programs in these cities. And I do have another example for you regarding the key government officials, but it's actually not for Bird. This one is for Lyft. If you guys are familiar or know of Anthony Fox, he was the former mayor of Charlotte, and then he became the U.S. Secretary of Transportation under Barack Obama, but he's now the chief policy officer at Lyft. So these companies that have no shortage of capital are bringing on board some of the people who have been very key in implementing transportation programs and policies across the U.S. So their team is pretty strong for sure. So here's some interesting information, and this is stuff I also find so fascinating. Technology has come a long way to improve some of these bike and scooter share programs. I've got several examples here of how, what different companies are saying as far as what they can offer to make sure these bike and scooter share programs are more effective and efficient, and it all comes back to technology. There's a gamification element. So when you start a membership for, let's say, a bike or a scooter share, and you're setting up your membership and entering your information, it can require you to go through a parked or not quiz. So what it will do on your mobile app is it'll put two pictures side by side. One shows the scooter or the bike improperly parked, and then the picture beside it shows it properly parked. And you have to select a picture that is properly parked. and you got to do that like 10 times. So by the time you finish your registration, you have demonstrated that you are aware how these are supposed to be parked, that they're not supposed to be fallen over, or if they're supposed to be parked at a certain location, you understand this before you can even start to ride. And then another gamification element is where riders can earn credits for reporting and reparking poorly parked assets. So, you know, let's say you've got a membership for a bike share provider, and you're walking by and you see that one of those same bikes has fallen over. You don't need to ride it right now, but if you go onto the app and you report it, then the maintenance team can come by and handle that accordingly. Or if there is a bike that is left where it's not supposed to be, and you have the time to take it and relocate it where it needs to go, then you can get a credit for your next ride. And then another technology improvement that these companies are talking about is turn-by-turn instructions to follow preferred routes. So they can take the technology where these assets are located and match them with where the existing facilities are and where cities want people riding these assets. And when you are on a bike or a scooter, there's actually a speaker that would be on there, and that speaker will be telling you turn-by-turn instructions to ensure that you are following the bike lanes or the bike paths or whatever it is that city wants you to be riding these on, so that you are hopefully riding in the safest environment while you're trying to get from point A to point B. And another thing that's pretty neat is they're coming out with sensors that can determine if an asset is on pavement or concrete. So, for example, there's cities where they do not want bike share or scooter share assets on sidewalks. Well, sidewalks are made out of concrete. So they have these sensors set up so that if you are going more than like 5 miles an hour and you're on concrete, you will be getting a notification saying, hey, it looks like you're riding your bike or your scooter on a sidewalk, and we need you to move that to the roadway, and it will, which would be your asphalt. So, yeah, that's an interesting way to kind of help make sure that people are riding those assets where they are supposed to be. And then another neat little technology improvement is after you are done riding a bike or a scooter, you take a picture of where and how you parked it to confirm that you did do it properly. And similar to that is to get started with a membership, you have to take a picture of your ID, and there's technology on the back end that can scan your birthday and make sure that you are at least 18 years old to hopefully avoid having children out riding scooters and bikes in the roadway. And another interesting technology improvement is to be able to geofence speed zones. So this is an example that you see on this slide. So this is with the City of Austin and the UT campus, where the UT campus, UT has decided, there are certain areas where we do not want people on scooters more than 8 miles an hour because it's just too fast. So you can geofence those zones. So no matter how hard a user tries, no matter how much they squeeze the throttle there, that scooter will not go more than 8 miles per hour until they get out of that zone. And then like the next zone may be capped at 15 miles per hour. Another similar one that I have seen is where there are zones in cities where they're okay with the scooters operating, but they want them to go much slower than that. So you can actually completely disable the electric component on the scooters, and then that way people who are riding the scooters can only go as fast as what their feet will push them. So that's another example. And then, these scooters and the bikes, they have tilt sensors. So if scooters or bikes gets knocked over, then it sends that information back to the maintenance crew, and they will come out and set them back up properly. And there's also a safety component I like that's come out called a share your trip option. So if you're getting ready to take a bike or a scooter from point A to point B, but maybe it's late at night, and you just want someone else to know what you're doing, then you can share your trip and it will notify that person when you do get to your destination. And then to me, the autonomous rebalancing one is the one that I find most interesting and amusing. So this would be, autonomous rebalancing would be really more with the scooters, where the scooters may be located where they're not supposed to be, or maybe their battery is getting ready to go dead. And the scooter will take itself to either the nearby proper parking location or the nearby charging station, and it will set itself up to be charged. So what I picture is sitting at like a sidewalk cafe, enjoying your lunch, and then a scooter with absolutely no one on it just comes cruising down the sidewalk at an appropriate speed to go by the nearby charging station. So that just kind of makes me giggle a little bit. So what does the federal government think of all of this? The Transportation Research Board, FTA, Federal Highways, the Shared Use Mobility Center, and several other partners are working to use research to help guide the direction of shared and new mobility in the United States. They're working on developing guidelines for cities regarding the implementation of shared use mobility options and connected and autonomous vehicles. And they've set several priorities. One is to preserve the existing transit options. Another one is to create a centralized place for users to access these mobility options. And then, of course, equity is always going to be a priority. So looking at the first priority of preserving the existing transportation options, this is important because our existing transit system has a huge impact on reducing the number of vehicle miles traveled in single occupant vehicles. For example, the top 6 light rail systems in the country provide more than 30 million unlinked passenger transit rides per year. So we cannot replace that with this. What we need to do is continue to connect people to these transit options and hopefully increase ridership even more by providing those first and last mile services to the train station, to the bus stop. And of course, we want to integrate the technology to include the existing transit and transportation options and the new mobility microtransit solutions. And then, venturing into the questions like, how do we transition from a transit stop or like a bus stop to a mobility hub? So what would be just a place where you could catch the bus would also be a place where you could catch the bus, you could grab a bike, you could grab a scooter, and there's just more that is offered at this stop. So this is kind of some of the things that are looking at for preserving the existing transit options. And here's a case study I really like. This is Via to Transit. This is in the Seattle area. And if you look at this map, there is a red line that shows the link to light rail, and there's different zones, the blue zone, the yellow, gold color, green, and orange. So you can catch one of these via vehicles anywhere in these zones, and they'll take you to the closest light rail station. So that's a great example of using the first last mile services to be able to connect you to the existing light rail service. So then the next priority is a centralized place for users to access options. So the big goal here is to provide a complete trip. So your complete trip would be where you have just one mobile app, not 5, not 3, just one mobile app with everything that you need to get from point A to point B. And you only make one payment for the entire trip going from point A to point B. But you also want these options to avoid traffic congestion and unsafe routes. If there's an accident, it can shift in real time, and also even based on the availability of your assets. It can shift in real time to continue to provide these mobility options. So what you would do is you would pull up this app and you would enter your origin and destination. And let's say you're wanting to leave your house in Arlington, Virginia, and you're wanting to get to your hotel in New York City. The results may come back and say, an Uber is going to be at your front door in a few minutes. It will take you directly to the train station, connect you with the exact train that you need to take to New York City. It will tell you exactly where to get off in New York City, and then it may tell you that you have a bike share bike number 34 that is waiting for you as soon as you get off that train in New York City. And then when you get on that bike, it's going to give you step-by-step instructions to make sure that you are on roads with bike lanes to get from your train station to your hotel. But in the end, what you do is you make one payment for those 3 modes. So you had an Uber ride, you had a train ride, and you had a bike share ride. But you don't make 3 payments to 3 different companies, and you don't use 3 different apps. All of that is in one app, and you make one payment for the entire trip. But this can also get tricky. So basically, we're talking about a nationwide platform. So for example, if you live in Dallas and you are always using their platform, which would include, their light rail and their bus system and, all the mobility assets that they have, what happens if you're in LA? Can you use that same app that you were using in Dallas to be able to coordinate your trip in LA? And I leave that with a question mark because we're working on it. But there's a couple challenges behind this too. Generally speaking, private companies don't want their prices to sit side by side on an app. So they're not They don't really want, the price for one company being $8 and the price for another company being $9 to sit side by side. Also, everyone wants control of this comprehensive app. Cities want to control it, transit agencies want to control it, and the private companies also want to control this too. So that's just kind of a challenge that we're working on overcoming, particularly with these interesting new partnerships that are coming about. So then the next priority would be equity. There are definitely some documented equity issues, and I have some examples here just around bike share. For example, in Chicago, 2% of the city's bike share memberships are held by Black residents, yet 30% of the population is comprised of African Americans. And there's even more of a discrepancy in Washington, D.C., where 3% of Capital Bike Share memberships are held by Black residents, but 50% of the population is comprised of African Americans. And there was a study done in 2016 of the 7 biggest bike share programs in the U.S. And it resulted in documenting that people making more than $100,000 per year were more likely to live within 0.3 of a mile of a bike share station compared to those making less than $20,000 per year. And the same applies to people with and without college degrees. So if you get into the why and how is this discrepancy so bad, there's some surveys done, to ask people like, where's the barriers for using these assets? And Black and Hispanics reported that it was a fear of collision, robbery, and poor road conditions. Low income and minority neighborhoods reported a lack of information on discount programs, safety, and a concern regarding liability and hidden fees, which I feel like that, to me, I kind of read that as a little bit of they're untrusting of what this really is. And another survey showed that low income and people of color are less likely to have exposure to bike share through their family and friends networks. But something that is definitely documented is also a lack of access to the assets. When you have to travel a mile to get to a bike share station, that's also a barrier as well. So equity, what private companies are offering, they are doing their best to provide an equitable program. So they offer things like roundup payments. Let's say you take a bike or a scooter ride and your total is $4.50. At the end of your ride, it may say, hey, do you want to round up to $5? And you would donate that additional 50 cents to, a pot of money for, people who may not be financially able to make those payments. Another one is donate a ride. Let's say you go for a ride and at the end it says, hey, thanks for your ride. Would you like to donate a ride to someone in need? And you can say yes, and maybe that's a $3 value or something like that. And then there's also several programs out there where as long as you can confirm that you participate in a federal assistance program, then that would qualify you for the free or discounted rides. But then, my suggestion would just be to be cautious of allowing mobility service providers to choose which populations to serve. So they're generating their revenue off of ridership dollars. So you want to make sure that they are providing these services to everywhere, not just the wealthier end of town. So there are several efforts to provide better geographic coverage. For example, in San Francisco, there is a policy that 20% of the bike docks are required to be in low-income communities, and they do have that heavy infrastructure stations in place. But this does ensure that when their system expands, it expands equitably, if that is a word. Another example is in New York City. In 2019, they did a dockless bike share program in select boroughs. So these boroughs did not have a bike share program at all, but they did decide to go with a dockless bike share program to help with those lower startup costs, because the docked bike share programs, which New York City also has, are also quite expensive. And then in Chicago, they required that 25% of the e-scooter fleets are to be redistributed nightly to priority areas. So usually every night there are chargers that will come by and scoop up the scooters and take them and recharge them and put them back on the streets the next day. So in Chicago, they have to make sure that the scooters don't just get to go anywhere, but 25% of that fleet needs to go to their priority areas, which is their low income and the communities that need access to to these mobility solutions the most. So as far as an approach to equitable mobility services, even if you currently have a mobility program, or if you're looking at bringing a mobility service program into your city, there's a little bit of a checklist that you can do to kind of make sure that you are providing equitable services. And interestingly enough, the first 5 are the same 5 E's that you would look at to make a place great for bicycling. So engineering, education, encouragement, enforcement, evaluation, and planning, all important for an equitable mobility service, but also the equipment distribution and the expense. What are you charging for membership and what are the user fees? Are also important for creating these equitable programs. And then for the government funding opportunities, there's several that are out there. CMAQ funds, STBG funds, TAP funds will all fund various mobility programs depending on what the program is. There's other funds out there as well. And of course, state funds are going to vary state by state. A new example that I came across that I really like what's going on behind this is the California Air Resources Board, and they've got several partners, are allocating $17 million in vouchers for disadvantaged communities to implement these clean mobility options. So they're working through exactly what that means and how that's going to be allocated, and that'll come out probably beginning of next year. So in 2016 was when the federal government took the first stab at trying to fund these innovative mobility programs. So FTA released $8 million to demonstrate and evaluate these innovative approaches to integrated mobility on demand, or MOD, solutions within a public transportation framework. The Mod Sandbox is to provide a platform where these integrated MOD concepts and solutions are supported and demonstrated through local partnerships in a real-world setting. FTA-funded project teams to adopt innovative business models to deliver high-quality, seamless, and equitable mobility solutions for all travelers. So what they did was, when they awarded these funds, there was a 2-year program. The first year was for planning, and the second year was for implementation. And then, there was a lot of data that came out of this and a lot of lessons learned. And, they were like, hey, these people are trying to do these new crazy things in mobility. Let's see how this shakes out. And then so they had some guiding principles of the Mod Sandbox demonstrations, and these are completely reflective of the 3 priority areas that we just discussed. So it's the system integration and the technology component, the partnership driven with the public-private partnerships, the innovative business models, and the equity component of these service deliveries. So the grantees from the 2016 Mod Sandbox are listed here. There are 11 total. You will notice that there are a lot of transportation authorities, a lot of transportation agencies. As you can see, this is what they were saying. They would like to see the backbone of these mobility programs. And what exactly did FTA fund? If you look at these 11 projects, all 11 projects directly involved public transportation agencies. And this goes back to wanting to preserve and enhance our existing public transportation options in the country. And 10 out of these 11 projects are specifically for first mile and last mile services. The only other one was in Tampa, St. Pete, and it was specifically for paratransit, which is people with disabilities. So that's a little bit of a different category. And then 9 out of 11 of these projects involve integrating a mobility service provider with the public transportation options in one app. So this is one app that will show you how to take a Lyft ride to the train station or a microtransit ride to a transit center. That's an example of those. And then 7 out of 11 projects, interestingly enough, included partnerships with Lyft, mostly direct partnerships. And Uber was not a direct partner of any of these projects, but they were referenced several times as hoping to integrate and partner with in the future. And then 6 out of these 11 projects involve bike share, which I thought was interesting too. But also keep in mind, there were no scooter share projects in the Mod Sandbox grants because this was 2016 and scooters actually had not hit the ground here at this time. So after this funding opportunity, the Mod Sandbox funding opportunity was released in 2016, Then came 2019 with the Integrated Mobility Innovation Grant. So the purpose here is very similar to the Mod Sandbox, and they broke this down into 3 different components, one being the Mobility on Demand, Mod Sandbox demonstrations, just like last time, but they added 2 other categories for transit automation research and mobility payment integration. And you can combine with different pots of money here. So you could theoretically come up with a project where it was a Mod Sandbox project, but it also had the mobility payment integration incorporated in it as well. But the IMI demonstration goals are also very similar to what we've been talking about as well, exploring new business approaches, enabling communities to adopt innovative mobility solutions, and facilitating the widespread deployment of proven mobility solutions. So there's a lot to take into consideration with these mobility programs. I can honestly pull together a whole nother hour-long presentation for each one of these bullet points. But just a few things to kind of keep in mind or consider if you're considering this is there may be legal issues. Engineering is also very important. ADA accommodations is huge. Cost share. How much of this are you going to take on as a city or a transit agency, and how much of this cost are you going to hand off to the users? Safety is always a big component. And of course, community engagement, education, outreach, making sure the community is involved and aware of this is also a huge component. There's just a lot that goes into making sure that these programs are successful. And if I was to give you guys some takeaways, partnerships. So the partnerships in this realm are definitely changing a bit. You know, for example, if you're trying to do an integrated payment option where you want people to get onto one app and make a payment that would go to all these services, you may have a partner like Visa or MasterCard involved with this, which hasn't really been a traditional partner in the past. And then technology, I cannot even speak to how important this is. The data is huge. There are standards to this, and you've got to be able to share your data, but you also need to be able to use your data to continuously improve your program. So the data that comes out of this is huge. Also, the technology for the mobile app and the user experience. If you finally convince grandma to download this mobile app and use it to take more than one transportation service, and all of a sudden in the middle of her bus ride, it doesn't tell her to get off the bus and grandma's stuck on the bus and lost, grandma's never going to use this mobile app again. So you'll start losing users if you don't have that solid technology component. And then to the planners, I would just suggest listen to your public's needs. So if you hear about how there's gaps in transit service and they're saying, hey, I really need to be able to take the bus, but I can't get to the bus stop, it's so far away. I mean, one option would be to create a whole new bus route, but that's also quite expensive. So maybe another option would be to create these microtransit mobility services that can connect people to those bus routes. And be ready to conduct your research, set your goals, and learn your options, and set your priorities for what works best for your city and what you need to have. You know, a lot of this is very generic and high level, but when you get into it, you're going to have your own needs and your own concerns within your own cities, so you need to be able to address those. And when you have those set up, partner with someone in the private sector that is willing to meet those priorities and to take care of those needs. So those partnerships are also super important. And with that, I will open it up to all the questions that you guys may have.
All right, thank you, Adrienne. We do have one that has come in, and bear with me while I read it. Can you discuss from a regulatory standpoint how to handle disruptive technology? For instance, we are in a Dillon Rule state, and the technological capabilities you discussed for e-scooters varies with each company. Do you believe regulations or best planning practices start at the state or with the locality, bearing in mind that localities are creatures of the state, so it gets a bit complicated?
Yes, it does get a bit complicated. Yeah, so there are there are examples of where on a state level there have been barriers to implement these. For example, I believe it was the state of Wisconsin, where the way that they defined a scooter with an electric component, it would actually be classified as a vehicle. And if it's a vehicle, it needs to pass an emissions test, which they don't have those on scooters. It needs to show that the turn signals are working, also not on scooters. So on the state level, they would need to adjust some of those policies. And then hopefully from that point, that would leave it up to each city to be able to implement policies further. So I do think it's kind of back and forth like a tennis match. So you got to make sure that at least on a state level, that they are legal. But then I think, one city in a state, may be able to handle these mobility solutions much differently than another city. And not to say that one is right or wrong, but just kind of going back to cities' needs and what they need. It's definitely tricky. But it's possible. And, kind of going back to the partnerships idea, something else I would suggest is if you're wanting to implement this in a city and you're trying to figure out the legal issues and ramifications within your city or your transit agency, make sure the people that you're working with too are also like enthusiastic. They are, they feel like this is promising. They are excited about this. Not so much the naysayers, because it's going to be kind of hard to get anywhere with the naysayers on board within your own organization. Did I answer that well enough, do you think?
I think so. It was not my question, but I hope so. And
Yeah, I hope so.
Ask that. Tara, if there's any follow-up, let us know. There is a note from Amy O'Hara, just an FYI, people should be on the lookout for a webinar from FTA on legal requirements on partnerships between TNCs and transit agencies coming in October. Thank you for that, Amy. If you get any information, we are happy to push that out. Another question, are the scooter and rideshare companies receptive to integrating with transit and serving more than just affluent geographic areas?
Yes. So that is definitely something that has been coming about more often. I do see that these agencies are interested in that integration, and they have different ways of promoting themselves. So, the ultimate goal is to be able to have all of this housed in one mobile app. And, as long as the user downloads this app, not only does it make them aware of the bike and the scooter share options, but it also promotes the local transit options as well. But they've offered things such as, hey, if you take this bus, you can have 15 minutes of free ride time on a bike or a scooter as soon as you get off the bus. So they're definitely working together to complement that transportation. That's been a really cool thing to watch as these partnerships actually come through. It is tricky on the technology end, but they're definitely interested and willing to play.
All right. Our next question is, we see a proliferation of golf carts on neighborhood streets, and you spoke of small four-wheeled vehicle services. Any thoughts on the possibility of these vehicles becoming autonomous?
There is. So the autonomous is kind of a whole nother beast in this. But if you remember in that IMI grant funding opportunity, there was a component in there for autonomous vehicles. So from what I understand, they are testing those same vehicles being autonomous, just like they're testing autonomous shuttles and all the other autonomous vehicles out there. So from what I hear, that is in the testing phase.
Okay, thank you. We have a next one. I think this is more of just a general presentation question. Would it be possible to forward this presentation to other colleagues? I know of representatives from our local transit agency who would be interested in this webinar, but they're not APA Virginia members. So I can answer that. Absolutely, please share this. But please remember that as you get these webinar announcements, these are not limited to just APA members. These are open and free to anybody and anyone who wants to do them. The CM credits come from APA National, so if you are a member of APA in another state, you're still eligible to collect those CM credits. But as I said before, this presentation, along with all the others, will be on our YouTube page, which a MailChimp will go out, an e-blast will go out after this with that link, but you can always just look up APA Virginia on YouTube and you'll find this, and it'll be loaded in about the next hour. So again, if you have any questions about distribution of this, you can reach out to me, Martina, at apavirginia.com. That is the last question I see coming through, unless anybody else has any other questions. I'm going to give it one more minute to see if anything else pops up. All right, we had one more comment. The Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation has developed a statewide integrated mobility plan and has resources available to help transit agencies and locals. That is from Jennifer DeBrule. Jennifer, if you would share maybe a link to that plan with me, I'm happy to share that in the news blast that'll go out after this with all the links in it if people want to be able to access that. So if you send me an email, I will get that out to everybody else. All right, let's see. Oh, we have one more question, and we're almost at our time limit, so this will be our last one. Has Google Maps been involved in any of the talks for the development of an integrated mobility app? I noticed there are options for using car, walking, or bus when the app gives directions.
Yes, so yep, Google is playing in this space as well, and that's been kind of another, maybe I would call it like a competitive point, maybe between some of these companies is how will Google incorporate all of these different companies? Because, you know, when this started, especially with like the scooters, you know, there were maybe you know, 2 or 3 different scooter companies out there and, you know, a couple different bike share companies out there, but now there's just a lot of different service providers. So, you know, what Google's trying to figure out now is like, wow, it's not only Bird that has scooters, but there's lots of companies that have scooters. So how do we get all of those different companies to function in one app is a challenge, but, you know, it's Google, so they're taking it on, of course.
And then we had one more come through. If you have just one more minute, how does the ability access high quality wireless communications affect the effectiveness and efficiency for providers and users of these new forms of transit?
Yeah, so that is definitely an important component. And one of the issues that I ran into a while ago is a city that is in a rather rural, actually more of a town that was in a more rural part, and their Wi-Fi was a little bit touchy. And, you know, one of the conversations we had is, you know, there's a little bit of a fear of trying to do this because if the Wi-Fi is touchy because it's in a much more rural area, you know, that could frustrate users, make them give up. And then if there's money that's invested in this program, is that money wasted? That's definitely a barrier that would need to be overcome for sure.
All right. Well, thank you, Adrian, for presenting. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend an hour with us today. Just a reminder, again, our next webinar is October 28th, Building a Resilient Community Through Your Comprehensive Plan. And also, as I've reminded you throughout, if for some reason you're not getting our announcements about webinars, please reach out to me and I'll make sure that you're added to those lists. And you will get something shortly notifying you that this webinar recording has been posted and how to access it. So thank you so much, Adrian. And we look forward to seeing everybody next month.
Yes, thank you guys.